Okay, so let's get to the meat of the discussion. Atheism in Serbia. Well, as in other places, atheism began to gain prominence in the new social movements of the 20th century, for the most part in communism. One thing you should know about the Orthodox Church is that even though it likes to portray itself as a perpetual victim, wherever Orthodox Church had power, it was not really the angel it portrays itself to be. So in the Tsarist Russia, the Orthodox Church was basically connected with the highest levels of power and perpetuating a very unjust, very cruel, pseudo-feudal regime that basically completely oppressed the working classes. And if it seems that I'm now talking like a communist, the point is that communism would have never become a prominent force if there weren't legitimate grievances among the workers and peasants and so on. So communism represented modernity for most of the Eastern countries when it took off. For example, it was in communism that women finally gained the right to vote. It was in communism that, a sort of a democracy was established. Yes, it was a one-party, one could call it a one-party regime, but for the first time, yes, true, you were voting only for members in your own party, but for the first time there was a sense that every citizen was equal. That simply did not exist in monarchies before that. So with communism came most things that people in the West associate with modernity. And one of those things was atheism. So communists could have well been Christians. Jesus, in my opinion, was the first communist. The people writing the Gospels were the first people that had communist ideas as to how the economy and society should run. But just because the churches were too entrenched in the previous power structure, that didn't work. So you had communism and atheism. Now, communism is itself a very religious ideology. I mean, it just replaces worshipping one thing with another, the leader of the party or the party itself. So I do believe that it's a very low blow for religious people to associate atheism with communism. It would be just as fair to associate Christians with, the crimes of atrocities that Muslims did, for example, or vice versa. It's completely two different worlds, the more modern secular humanism and communism. The only thing they have in common is that gods do not exist. But it should be a cautionary lesson that any idea, however good, can become extremist, can become an ideology, which is a bad thing, and can do more harm than good by zealous, unthinking propagation instead of actually engaging people in dialogue. So yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to say in that respect. So we should not think, we should always guard ourselves against such ways of thinking. If you don't think that this could happen to you, you're already halfway there. So the communist debacle should be a cautionary tale for all atheists, even though we should not feel personally responsible as atheists for anything that the communist regimes have done, and any religious people who tries to peddle that, just blow them the fuck off. But for better or for worse, atheists atheism in Serbia for 50 years had teeth. It had force. And one aspect of that was that religious behavior was discouraged. It was, you know, not to the degree in Russian, but, you know, if you had religious beliefs, you sort of kept them to yourself. And needless to say, if you wanted to be high up in the party, you did not have religious beliefs. So it was ridiculed. Religious rights were severely infringed. And that was a bad thing. But for better or for worse, one of the consequences of that was that atheists are not oppressed in Serbia. On that level, they're probably on par with Sweden. Saying to someone in Serbia that I'm an atheist is about as controversial as saying I have a brother and a sister. Because the religious situation in Serbia is very ambiguous. Neither was communism the triumph of atheism, nor is now there sort of a massive return to religion, the Orthodox Church that the church people are peddling. Sure, everyone goes to the church for Christmas, Easter, their Slava, their guardian saint. But apart from having a form closer to that of the church, those are pretty much secular holidays. I mean, I do them. Every single family in Serbia does them regardless of religious beliefs. But if you scratch the surface, you would see, in terms of what Serbs actually believe, that there's an entire range of beliefs. I would say the dominant position, religious position in Serbia is some sort of either agnosticism, deism, or extremely moderate theism, where you're simply, oh, this is our way of worshiping God. So even though everyone is nominally Orthodox, the actual beliefs of Serbs are all over the place. New Age stuff is extremely popular, which is a tragedy, considering the fact that during the 90s, you know, the entire, you know, you don't let a sucker keep his money, well, that might make sense if the sucker was some rich schmuck, but 90s brought with the crisis a lot of poor, desperate people that needed help, psychological, physical, and turned to mediums that charged insane amounts and basically robbed them of their life savings for nothing. So basically, the position of atheism in Serbia is that even though few people actually, relatively few, I mean, I'd say at least I'd say between 10 and 20% of Serbia are some sort of atheists. Even though that's the case, most Serbs are somewhere in the middle, between serious religiousness and outright atheism. So, you know, I'm just gonna stop this.